What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. Now before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, we're getting a 6.6-inch 120Hz PLS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 400, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 82.5% screen-to-body ratio. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting a 6.8-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 395, an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, and an 85.8% screen-to-body ratio. So both of these phones have really good displays, and they're actually really similar for the most part. The only real difference here is that with the Moto G Stylus 5G, first of all, at 6.8 inches versus 6.6, it is a bit larger, and this tends to be a good thing when you're consuming a lot of content, makes things a little bit larger and easier to see. And in addition to this, with an aspect ratio of 20.5:9 versus 20:9, the Moto G Stylus 5G has a slightly taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're doing something like watching a video in landscape mode, for example, you're going to get a more immersive experience. And if you're doing something vertical like browsing the web or using social media, you'll be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. But that being said, with a 20:9 aspect ratio, the A23 5G really isn't far behind. So in general, I feel like that difference isn't really too big. But that being said, again, the Moto G Stylus 5G is clearly larger here. So if you are consuming a lot of content and you do want a phone with a larger display, then of course the Moto G Stylus 5G will have an advantage. But again, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G does have a really good display as well, so you're not really going to go wrong with this phone either. Now for storage, there's quite a difference here. With the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, we're getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting 256GB with microSD card expansion as well. Now keep in mind, this is the factory unlocked version of the Moto G Stylus 5G that you can get directly through Motorola, and if you get it through a carrier, the storage might be a little bit less. And likewise with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, this phone in my hand is the US version, and I believe the international version does have 128GB. But that being said, for this specific comparison, with the US version of the A23 5G and the unlocked version of the Moto G Stylus 5G, the Moto G Stylus 5G clearly has an advantage here. So if you are more of a power user, if you have a bunch of apps and stuff like that, then the Moto G Stylus 5G will definitely be a much better choice. But on the other hand, with the A23 5G, 64GB, while not really being ideal in my opinion, is still going to be acceptable for more average users. So if you're not really doing a ton with your phone and you don't have a bunch of apps and stuff like that, then you're still probably going to get by with the A23 5G. But again, if storage is more of a concern for you, the Moto G Stylus 5G obviously has a huge advantage here. Now, as far as security features go, both phones do have face unlock, as well as fingerprint scanners right here in the power keys, so definitely great spots for a fingerprint scanner. But starting with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, let's go ahead and give them a try and see how they work. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Moto G Stylus 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember, both phones also do have face unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a full quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we got a hole punch design for the front facing camera. This camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera that doubles as a macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So as far as features go, these phones have pretty much everything. Really the only difference here is that with the Moto G Stylus 5G, the ultra wide camera and macro camera are combined into one, which really isn't that much of a difference. They both have all the features, so it's not really going to matter either way. And as far as quality goes, these phones are going to be about the same. Sure, obviously the photos will look a little bit different because on one hand with the Samsung, the colors tend to be a little bit more saturated, whereas with the Moto G Stylus, the colors are more realistic and the photos are brighter. But at the end of the day, the differences are so subtle that if you saw two pictures taken from each phone completely separate from each other, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So in general, I wouldn't really use the camera quality or features for that matter as a deciding factor between these two phones because they're really going to be at the same level. But that being said, these phones do take really good photos. So if you're taking lots of photos, maybe to share on social media for example, you want a wider variety of features and you really want the photos to look nice, but at the same time you don't don't need the absolute top of the line quality you might get from a flagship phone, then either of these phones will absolutely get the job done. And for video, it's the same kind of thing. Both phones have a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, and I would say in general the videos do look pretty good. But as far as audio goes, I do think the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G sounds a little bit better when you're recording videos on it, but the Moto G Stylus 5G really isn't bad either. So at the end of the day, it's probably not going to make a whole lot of a difference. But keep in mind, one other thing about video I almost forgot to mention is that with the Moto G Stylus 5G, you can record your 1080p videos at 60 frames per second, whereas with the A23 5G, as you can see right up here, it does max out at 30, whereas again, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, as you can see here, you can record at 60. And as far as RAM and processor go, these phones actually have the same processor with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G. And for RAM, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G is getting 4GB of RAM and the Moto G Stylus 5G is getting 8. Now that being said, I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on these phones, and here are the scores right here. As you can see, pretty much as expected, these phones are basically going to be around the same level, so you're not really going to see a huge performance difference between the two. But that being said, no matter what you're doing on these phones, whether you're doing more simple activities like web browsing, social media, stuff like that, or some stuff like mobile gaming, whatever the case may be, while these phones are not going to be anywhere near as fast as a $1,400 flagship phone, for example, they will get the job done in most cases. And unless you're doing really high performance activities, or you're just going to be on your phone all the time, for the average user, as far as performance goes, either of these phones will be perfectly fine. Now, neither of these phones have wireless charging, which is not too surprising because after all, at this point in 2022, most phones that aren't flagship phones are not going to have that feature. But that being said, both phones do have 5,000 mAh batteries, with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G supporting 25W fast charging and the Moto G Stylus 5G supporting 15. So as far as battery life and longevity goes, with 5,000 mAh batteries, that's pretty much the largest battery you can get in a smartphone, at least in the US, so you can expect to get great battery life here. And for fast charging, even with the Moto G Stylus 5G, that again only supports 15W fast charging, I have noticed in my experience, the charging speeds are still pretty good with this phone, and they are even better with the A23 5G. So in general, if you are looking for a phone with a great battery, then either of these phones will be a great choice. As far as other features go, both phones do have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using Tap and Pay, you'll be happy to know you can do that with either phone. In addition to this, as the name suggests, obviously the Moto G Stylus 5G does have a stylus, whereas the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G doesn't. So if you do want a phone with a stylus, this is definitely something to keep in mind because after all, the Moto G Stylus is one of maybe 2 or 3 phones in this price range that actually has a stylus, which definitely makes it more of a unique device. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, this is a really close one because in a lot of ways, these phones are almost evenly matched. But in general, I do feel like the Moto G Stylus 5G for the most part is a better device here. First of all, it has a clearly larger display and also a taller and more narrow form factor, which in general is just going to give you a better experience when you're consuming a lot of content. It also has quite a bit more storage, which definitely comes in handy if you're more of a power user. And again, it does have a stylus, which no matter what the price range is a feature really not very many phones have. But that being said, on the other hand, with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, this is really not a bad phone at all. And like I said, in a lot of ways, it's not really far behind the Moto G Stylus 5G. Another thing to keep in mind is that with the A23 5G, I have noticed a lot of carrier deals with this phone that are quite a bit better than the deals for the Moto G Stylus 5G. So if you are planning on getting your phone directly through a carrier, I would definitely check the deals because again, while there may be some for the Moto G Stylus 5G too, I have seen a lot of really good ones with the A23 5G. And in case you want to know more, I will be linking to several different prepaid carrier deals in the description below, so definitely check that out. But in general, again, these phones are really similar in a lot of different ways. But overall, I would say if you want a larger display, more storage, and of course a stylus, the Moto G Stylus 5G is going to be a significantly better choice. But that being said, if you're not too concerned about those features and you really just want a 5G phone that has good performance and just some good mid-range features overall, then you're not going to go wrong with either phone, and at that point, it's really just going to depend on the deals you can get. But this concludes my comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. Again, if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.